you did something interesting in this book, and you put something in there that most people usually don't analyze in pop culture books, and that's wrestling.
Yeah.
And one of the saddest graphs I saw, even I knew it, was the graph of the independent wrestling companies, or just wrestling companies, got devoured.
I'm real proud of that graph.
Yeah, because Vince's dad, it was almost like a mob thing. Listen, you have your territory, I have my territory, everything is fine. Vince comes in, it's like, I'm taking everything.
Yep. I'm either going to buy you or eat you or kill you. And
right.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah. And, he said a few, he just had Turner, WCW. You had ECW for a while.
Yeah.
And now you got AEW, which seems to be a viable option. What made you decide to put wrestling in there? Because you had your own story in there. But what made you decide?
Yeah. I like wrestling. I don't consume. I'm friends with a lot of smarks, is what I will say. A smark, as my friends have told me, is a guy who understands what's going on in wrestling, but appreciates it for its aesthetic qualities, even if they don't necessarily think that John Cena is getting beaten to death every week. It's a really fun, like, if you ever get an opportunity to go to an indie wrestling show in person, it is just a genuinely great time for your audience. It is one of my, I got a chance to go to a couple of them. The WWE product is very corporate and sanitized and kind of a very thoroughly done event, but the independent scene is very vibrant. And the chapter that you're referring to is basically asking what making art does to the people who make it. And I was very compelled by the story of wrestling because it kind of mimicked another thing that I talk about in the chapter, where it's wrestling used to have a lot of passed on knowledge. It used to have you could kind of enter it as an amateur and then work your way up. You would learn by wrestling with other people. You would go to a territory and then take your knowledge and go to a new territory and meet new people and exchange knowledge between you. That in a way that was a lot more collaborative as an art form. That allowed people to basically, there was a lot of work to go around, and there was a lot of people mixing together and brushing against one another and teaching one another all this kind of basically collaborative mentorship style. The WWE rolls up, Vince buys and kills all those territories, and all of a sudden you're not going from territory to territory anymore. There's only one game in town, and it's a national game. And if you get into it, it's phenomenally successful. But when you get into it, you are just as likely to lose your spot to a guy that you trained. So the incentive to collaborate and teach one another stuff instantaneously goes away, because the idea is why am I going to potentially train up the guy who's going to steal my very limited one job in a company that only employs a couple hundred guys? It used to be that, when the work ran out in one territory, you could move on to the next one. But since there's only one game in town, it's just it's diminished the ability of these folks to collaborate and innovate and put together new ideas. And obviously, the WWE is a phenomenally successful product, and I don't want to diminish any of that. And the people who are in it and successful are doing interesting and compelling things. But there is something that competition brings out, and there is something that working with new collaborative partners works out, and there is something that having an opportunity to experiment and teach and learn without having your livelihood potentially taken from you that has been lost. And I think that it's kind of interesting to kind of look at that part of the story, with wrestling not just as what are we seeing, and not just as the biggest show in town, but what is it like to work for these companies? And more importantly, what is it like to not be able to work for these companies because there's only 200 slots and you don't have the right dad?